Welcome back to Unfinished Files, where some stories are still waiting for the truth. A young man is accused of murdering his own parents. The evidence seems convincing. The jury finds him guilty. But years later, people start asking a terrifying question. Did they convict the wrong person? Royce City, Texas. A town where people left their doors unlocked, where violent crime was something you only saw on the news. On a quiet Tuesday in October 2005, that sense of safety shattered. It started with a simple welfare check. A friend, worried after days of silence, drove out to the new double-wide on a lonely stretch of road. Inside, the air was heavy, still. The friend called out, but there was no answer. Then came the discovery no one in Royce City would ever forget. Dennis and Norma Woodruff were found together on their living room couch. The scene was brutal, too brutal for this town. Both had been shot. Norma's throat was cut. Dennis had been stabbed again and again. There was no sign of a break-in, no shattered glass, no kicked-in door. The house was undisturbed, almost eerily so, as if the killer had been expected. The first deputies on scene struggled to process what they were seeing. This wasn't supposed to happen here. The Woodruffs were well-known, hard-working, church-going, just settling into their new home. Word spread quickly. Neighbors gathered at the edge of the property, whispering in disbelief. Shock turned to fear. If something like this could happen to Dennis and Norma, it could happen to anyone. For a town used to routine calls about livestock or the occasional dispute, the presence of police tape and flashing lights felt like a nightmare. The question on everyone's mind was simple. Who could have done this? And why? In the early hours, suspicion turned inward, to those closest to the victims. But this is where things get strange. Inside the Woodruff home, nothing was out of place, except for the violence that had taken place on that couch. The doors were locked, windows intact, not a single drawer rifled, no valuables missing, no sign of a struggle. Whoever did this either had a key or was let in. To investigators, it was hard to ignore the chilling implication. The killer was someone the Woodruffs trusted. Both Dennis and Norma were attacked at close range. Norma's wounds were especially savage. She suffered 5 gunshots, and her throat was cut so deeply that the medical examiner later said it could only have been done by someone standing almost face to face. Dennis was shot once, then stabbed 9 times in the neck, chest, and face. The brutality suggested rage, but the lack of chaos in the room hinted at something colder, deliberate, and almost practiced. On that Sunday afternoon, Brandon Woodruff had stopped by for a quick visit. He was their only son, just 19, home from college. He said he had pizza with his parents before heading out again. It was the last time anyone admitted seeing Dennis and Norma alive. Neighbors recalled the family's routines, their church attendance, Dennis's steady job, and Norma's calls to her mother every night. Nothing about their lives pointed to enemies or secret feuds. Yet with no forced entry, suspicion crept closer to home. In a place where everyone knew everyone, the idea that a stranger could slip in unnoticed seemed impossible. For detectives, the absence of evidence became its own kind of evidence. The circle of trust was small. Brandon, whether by coincidence or by something else, was suddenly at its center. But when you look closer, the case isn't as solid as it first appears. For all the violence inside that living room, the trail of physical evidence runs cold almost as soon as it begins. No fingerprints were collected from the house, not from doorknobs, not from light switches, not from the gun cabinet or the kitchen. Blood was found on the carpet, but no one ever tested it for DNA. The bathroom sink, a possible place for a killer to clean up, was swabbed for blood stains. Nothing came back from the handles, and no DNA testing was done on the samples that were taken. And then there is the detail that keeps coming up. A clump of long blonde hair found in Norma Woodruff's hand. She may have grabbed it during the attack, but those hairs were never sent to a lab. No one knows who they belonged to. Defense attorneys would later argue that this single piece of evidence could have changed everything if only someone had tested it. Other items like fibers, touch, DNA, or even basic fingerprints were simply never collected or processed. The murder weapons, a .45 caliber revolver and a knife, were never recovered from the scene. A dagger found years later in an old barn had Dennis's blood on the hilt, but a forensic pathologist ruled out that blade as the source of the wounds. The gun, supposedly missing from a friend's house, was never found at all. For a crime so brutal, the lack of direct physical evidence is striking. Some believe the investigation had already made up its mind before all the facts were even on the table. From the earliest days of the investigation, the focus narrowed quickly. Brandon Woodruff, 19 years old, home from college, the last person known to see his parents alive, became the center of gravity. To investigators, the pieces seemed to fit. Motive, opportunity, behavior. Everything pointed in one direction. But this is where things get strange. With the spotlight fixed on Brandon, other possibilities faded into the background. The old family barn in Heath, just a short drive from the crime scene, was searched only briefly, deputies said. Years later, a dagger with Dennis Woodruff's blood would turn up in that same barn, raising questions about what else was missed. No one knows if the killer left something behind or if evidence slipped through the cracks while attention zeroed in on the son. Then there is the matter of the timeline. Investigators built their case around a narrow window between 9 and 11 in the evening, but the medical examiner could not confirm the exact time of death. Brandon's phone records, critical for tracking his movements, were never fully retrieved. 14 hours of potential data vanished before anyone thought to request them. The missing information could have shown someone else coming or going. A call made or received, another story entirely. Defense attorneys argued that tunnel vision set in early. Blonde hairs found clutched in Norma Woodruff's hand, a possible clue to her attacker, were never sent for DNA testing. The investigation followed a single path, leaving alternative scenarios unexplored. In a case where so much was left unproven, the question lingers. What if the truth lay just outside the circle of suspicion? 6 days after the bodies were found, Brandon Woodruff was arrested for the murders of his parents. Investigators moved quickly, convinced they had their man. On paper, the case looked airtight. Brandon was the last person known to see Dennis and Norma alive. The timeline, as prosecutors told it, left him alone with his parents during the narrow window when the killings took place. There was talk of motive, family tension, financial pressures, and secrets he was desperate to keep. But the evidence that made headlines was forensic. A .45 caliber bullet recovered at the scene matched a type missing from the home of his ex-girlfriend's mother. Prosecutors called it a direct link. Then came the dagger discovered years later in the family's old barn, stained with Dennis Woodruff's blood, and described as possibly consistent with one Brandon once owned. To the public, the narrative was clear. The son had the motive and the opportunity. The pressure was on, and the story prosecutors told was hard to ignore. 12 days in court, 5 hours behind closed doors. When the jury filed back into the Hunt County courtroom, the air was thick with anticipation and dread. Brandon Woodruff, just 23, stood as the verdict was read, guilty of capital murder. The sentence was life without parole, no chance for release. For some, it was a relief. A brutal crime had been answered, the community's sense of order restored. But in the rows behind the defense table, faces told a different story. Brandon's grandmother wept quietly, clutching a photo of the family that would never be whole again. Others sat in stunned silence, weighing what had just happened against everything that still did not add up. Outside, the town split along invisible lines. Some called it justice served. Others whispered about evidence that was never tested, timelines that never quite matched, and a case built on what was missing as much as what was there. In the end, the court reached a conclusion, but not everyone agrees it was the right one. Today, Brandon sits behind bars. No DNA, no fingerprints, no murder weapon ever tied him to the scene. The verdict stands, but the questions don't fade. When certainty is built on doubt, justice itself stays on trial. What if the wrong person is paying the ultimate price?